This is a science study, but it's actually very interesting because it was so well controlled. Each teacher in this study was teaching 4 parallel Year 8 science classes. And they did exactly the same thing for 2.5 hours a week with all 4 classes. But for half an hour each week, 2 of the classes did something different from the other 2 classes. So that in 2 of the classes, which were the control group, they asked the children to make comments about their likes and dislikes about this project work they were doing, and they were asked to make suggestions to the teacher about how to improve the teaching. The other 2 classes were asked to assess each other's work using a scoring guide and to help each other improve their work. So they were saying things like, well, you'll get a level 3 for this because you've done this, you've done this, and you've done this, but you won't get a level 4 because you haven't done this. So that was the only difference between these 4 groups. They wanted to check that the control group and the group that done the self-assessment or the peer assessment were matched. So they gave every kid in this experiment the Iowa test of basic skills, which is a basic numeracy and reading test. They then looked at the performance, and the kids in the likes and dislikes group, the kids in the bottom third on the Iowa test of basic skills averaged 4.6 on their 7 investigations. The kids in the middle third averaged 5.9, and the highest achieving students on the Iowa test of basic skills averaged 6.6. Where the children were doing the reflective assessment, the lowest performing children on the basic skills test did better than the best performing children in the control group, and the others did even better. Now, there's 2 important things about these data. The first is that everybody benefited. We didn't need to hinder the highest achieving students in order to advantage the lowest achieving students. Everybody who was in the reflective assessment group was advantaged. But the size of the gain was much greater for the lowest achievers. So the weaker students benefited by 2.1 levels, whereas the highest benefited by 0.8. And the effect of this is to close the achievement gap from 2 levels to 0.7. There's a very real sense in which understanding what it is you're meant to be doing is an unequally distributed resource in classrooms. Middle-class kids come to school often knowing what counts as quality work, and working-class kids often don't. And that's why interventions that help all the children understand what it is that's going to be valued in their work tends to narrow the achievement gap. Before you get kids to write an essay in French or German or whatever, just give them some essays from last year's class. Some good ones, some medium ones, and some poor ones, and ask them to comment on which is good and why. What you'll find is the first stories that they then produce are much better because they've thought about what it is involved in writing a good piece of work. And finally, here's a very interesting task. If you really want to do some test preparation, get the children to design their own test items with correct answers. There have been research studies that have shown that getting children to write test questions on what it is they've been learning with correct answers is the most powerful form of test preparation. It's more powerful than doing practice papers, it's more powerful than having a study guide, it's more powerful than leaving them to their own devices. It is simply the most powerful form of test preparation. And the advantage is you get to learn what they think they've been learning.